pleased to have the opportunity to hear from two of our Natalias. Natalia and Natalia will be able to tell us a little bit about their life and how faith played a part in that. So we ask for your attention and ask as usual that we keep these side conversations to a minimum. We're using amplification today, so we hope that that helps. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the Natalias, and after they make their presentations, then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So please save your questions until the end. Thank you very much. Who will be first?
Oh, you don't have to stand up.
Okay.
You're talking to it, but hold it close to your mouth.
Can you hear me?
We can, but maybe you can turn it up, Dima, a little bit. Is it possible? No?
Let me see what I can do.
All right, let's try with what we've got right now, Natalias, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead.
Well, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
So I have to tell you a little bit about my life. I hope you find it interesting. I'll start right from the beginning, a little bit background of where I came from. My parents, my mother and her family was from Moscow. There were 4 daughters of my mother's 3 sisters, and then the father and mother. They lived in Moscow, and in 1917, because things had become so difficult, they decided to go to the Crimea, hopefully to stay there for a little short time and until things would calm down. So they got to the Crimea, but they stayed there for almost 4 years. And things got only worse. So they decided they had to leave. There were boats, French and English boats, taking refugees. And they mounted one of these boats and left. My mother said there were 40 days on the boat, stopping in different countries on the way, trying to find a place where they could find a home, but nobody wanted them. They stayed in Constantinople for a whole week, but then they had to leave again. Finally, they got to Salonika in Greece, and the Greeks took them in. I guess my father was also on the same boat, but my mother didn't know him then. He had been in the White Army as a volunteer. So all these people descended in Salonika, and they stayed there for about a year. And then my mother's family moved to Athens. And she became acquainted with my father and my parents. The 4 sisters, my mother's 3 sisters, one who was in the Crimea, went back to Moscow. She said, oh, she would be okay. And the other 2, one went to France later, and another one went to America, got married and went to America. So I was born in Athens. We were very poor. There were a lot of Russians, and everybody just struggled. My father, who had been a historian, well, of course he didn't know Greek, although his profession was a teacher of history, Latin and ancient Greek. He became a chauffeur. So we struggled. We were very, very poor. We had just one room and one kitchen. That was all. When I was 5 years old, a very close friend of ours asked my mother if it would be okay if he would teach me violin. He had a little violin. And so my mother said, sure. And I was a very obedient child. I just said, okay. So we started violin lessons. Also at the same time, my mother started teaching me French. So I spoke French at home and Russian and then Greek outside the house. And I studied violin. When I was 8 years old, I went to a French school. Continued my violin, and then when I was 10 years old, this friend of ours had become sick. So my mother asked who was the best violin teacher in Athens. So she was told such and such a person at the conservatory. So she went there. And when he heard that I was only 10 years old, he said, well, I don't take children. I only teach the last, the superior class of the conservatory. Well, my mother talked him into it. So she said, okay, he's going to hear me play. So I played and he took me in. So I studied with him for 7 years. He was a very, very good teacher. When I was about 13, 14, the war started. And first, fought with the Italians. The Greeks fought with the Italians with a lot of success. But the Germans then came, and in 2 weeks they occupied all of Greece. Things became very difficult. There was terrible hunger. My father lost his job. People were dying in the streets. We would go in the street and you'd see people dead laying down. My father became so weak. He was all swollen and had he was in a terrible condition. So a couple of families, Russian families, took me in to sort of help out, and another family took my mother. Well, in 1944, although after a year or two, things became better. For some reason, there was more food. For some reason, I don't know. In 1944, a lot of things started happening in Greece, in Athens. I think because the war was coming to an end, also the Soviets were trying to take over Greece like they did eventually the rest of the Balkans. So there was this kind of a warfare going in Athens. People were shooting. It was difficult to even walk in the streets because there was so much shooting. And my mother decided at the time that if the Soviets were going to come to Greece, we couldn't stay there. We had to leave. So we took a train, maybe the last train that left Athens. That was September 13th, 1944. We took a train with another family, a friend family, a lady with 2 girls, a little younger than I was. I was 17 at the time. We got on this train and we traveled from Athens to Vienna. It took us 22 days in the train. because there was shooting, there were bombs. So we would travel only during the night. And sometimes the train would stop and then all of a sudden we'd go back. All of a sudden. We stopped somewhere in, they said it was Albania, but I don't know. I've never found out exactly where it was. It was in the mountains. There was no habitation, no people to see around. Again, our train was bombed, but we stayed for a week in this place in the mountains. Then we proceeded further. Eventually, we got as far as Hungary, and there things became more normal. We just traveled and got to Vienna. So we got to Vienna on the station, and we got out of the train. There were a lot of people, refugees everywhere. So we got there and we really didn't know what else are we supposed to do. We just sat there. And a man comes up and says that he would take us to a place where we would stay overnight. So we loaded on a bus or a truck, I would say. And they took us to a house, and that was really the first time we could lay down. There were some kind of like beds, because for 22 days in the train, there was nowhere to lay down. The next morning, my mother and this other lady friend decided to go into town and find out what we're supposed to do further, what was coming. So they left, and so I was left with the two little girls. And then the same man that took us from the station to this house came up to us and said, "You have to get on trucks, we are taking you somewhere." I said, "No, you can't take us now. Our mothers are not here." "No way. You are getting on that train, on that bus." So that was horrible. So we got on this bus, and he took us to some other station, train station. We were supposed to get on the train. So on the floor we had all our little belongings we had. The two girls went on the train, but I stayed. I just couldn't make myself go on. But then I see the train moving. So okay, I cannot stay back either. So I took our best piece of luggage and my violin case. I had my violin, you see. So we got on the train, and I remember going through the train, crying. And trying to find the two girls. Finally, I found them. So we went for a while, for about an hour. Then we were unloaded to another little station. So we were sitting there on a bench waiting, just didn't know what else was coming. And then all of a sudden a train comes, and I see the two mothers coming off the train. I was so happy, so relieved. They found out where we had gone, and they had come to find us. And from there, we were taken to a camp. It was a horrible camp, a dreadful camp. I thought that was the end of my days. But again, my mother, who spoke German very well, she went to the contact of the camp, talked to him, and persuaded him that we were of German origin. I don't know whether he believed her or not, but I guess it was the end of the war. Who cared, you know? So he said, "Okay, you can leave." So we left. I remember going, this camp was surrounded by barbed wire, and, you know, on high points there were soldiers with guns looking at us. So I thought, oh, just get through that gate, get out of here. So we did. Somebody at the camp, there were quite a few Russians, told us if we could get to Graz, that's city, Austria. But they had a good camp there. Maybe we could go over there and stay there. So we decided to go to Graz. I remember also staying there at that station, and I guess we were waiting for the train. But then there was a young man, I don't know, a soldier, I don't know who he was, went back and forth and sort of looking at us. And then he comes up to us and says, "Where are you going?" And we said, "To Graz." He says, "You're not going, you're on the right spot." So he took me by the arm and we went along, you know, quite a ways. And he took us to the right train. And as we got there, the train left. So I don't know, I always just think how some people, you know, just one person that helps you, that you don't know who it is. Just somebody, just like God sent you, sir. So we got on this right train, we took off right away, went to Graz. But since we had, my mother had sort of got permission or some kind of paper she got, I guess, that we were of German origin. We were sent to a family in, that was in Steiermark, that was in central Austria. We stayed in a family. I was supposed to help in the household with the children and all that. My mother was supposed to work in a factory. So we stayed there for 6 months. It was okay, you know, after all this, what we went through, that was okay. And then, according to the news, the Soviets were coming closer and closer. So my mother said, "No, we're not staying here. We have to go further west." Well, during that time also, my father had lost a leg through bombing. So he had been sent to a hospital, to a place called Lienz. That was in western Austria, that was in the Tyrol, the mountains. So that he was there. So my mother said, "We'll go over there." So one day we all, again, the other family too, all got together, got on a train, and it was just so full. I remember me and one of the girls were sitting where the trains, you know, where they joined together and they moved like this. That's where we sat. And my mother was holding on to outside on the steps on the train for several hours. She was just holding on like that. Well, finally we got to this place, Lienz. It took several hours. We came there during the night. It was just a beautiful night. The moon was shining, and I got onto the station and the mountains. I've never ever seen such mountains in my life. They're just right there, like in a fairy tale. At the same time, there was sirens. I guess planes were coming to bomb it, and the worst place to be during bombing is the train station. But fortunately, we didn't have to, couldn't go anywhere else. So we just stayed at the station. But unfortunately, nobody bombed. Well, gradually we stayed in this city. It was a very small city, about 5,000 inhabitants. We even got a small apartment because a lot of the people who lived there had left, went into the mountains because they were afraid of bombing. So we stayed in this little apartment. My father was in a camp close by, and the camp was called Pegins. There were a lot of Russians. Even if you went into the woods, there were people on little wagons, So were horses, a lot of Cossacks, whole families. And then the camp was also filled with Russians. Then after a few months, during the summer, there was rumors started going around that, oh, by the way, the war had ended and we ended up in the English zone. So there were English everywhere. So the rumors started going around that the Russians that were there, the camp at least, were going to be given over to the Soviets. Well, my mother said, well, okay, then we have to take my father out of that camp. So she and this other lady friend went to the camp and got my father, who was on crutches, and then a friend of his also on crutches. They brought him over. They had gone over a bridge and there were already infantry sentinels there, but they let them through. So they brought them home to stay with us. And the next day, the camp was surrounded by Soviet forces. And well, a lot of people I know committed suicide. An awful lot went on. Well, most of the people who were there were deported, went to Gulag, I guess. But my father was, and this man was saved. But there were a lot of Russians also who were, I guess, were not in the camp. Because after that, there was quite a big a lot of people, a lot of Russians. So we had a lot of friends. So actually, we lived in Lians there, in that little city, for 4 years. And I continued with my violin. I went to another little city by train. There was a conservatory. I studied there, and they were very, very kind to me. The director of the conservatory said that he found out that in another city, a little further, there was a marvelous teacher from Prague. He had fled from Prague. He didn't want to be in Vienna because it was the Soviet zone. So that I should go and study with him. So, and they would arrange it for me. See, I had to take the train in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, to go to that city. And I would get there about 7 o'clock in the morning, then I would have some classes and stuff. And they arranged it so I would stay in the office for the night. They gave me, there was a couch, there were some pillows, and like this, I would stay there overnight, take another train the next day to go to this other city to take my violin lesson. So that was what I did. And he was a marvelous teacher. The first time I went there, the lesson lasted 4 hours. And I was just exhausted. I just came out of it, could hardly walk. So then I had to take a bus back from that city to the other city to get a train. So I was at the end of the line to get into that bus. Just a few persons before me, they stopped and said, the bus is full, that's it. Nobody can go on the bus anymore. What do? I start crying. Because what am I supposed to do? For the first time in the city, there is no phone. Nobody had a phone. So my mother, if I didn't get back, we but she would go crazy. Well, it's pretty, like one of us. So I got to Boston, went to this other city, got the train, went home. So it continued, I went on like this for quite a while and had wonderful lessons. Then, since this was in the English zone, one of the things that was happening in this little town, there was like a theater with a hall, and a lot of us Russian girls, we were quite a few Russian girls, would go to this hall, and twice a week we had dances, and I loved to dance. So we would go to these dances. Of course, there were Russians, there were Austrians, and English. And one day, one of my girlfriends said, "See that young man there, this Englishman? He speaks French. I'm going to invite him to dance." I said, "How do I invite him to dance? You don't know him." "Oh," he said, "I'm going to invite him." So she went. She spoke some French. I guess they danced together, and this young man told her that he was so happy to be able to speak French because he doesn't know much German, and when he invited a Austrian girl, after 2 or 3 words, the conversation is ended. Well, she said, "Well, I'm not the only one who speaks French here. Here's another one." So that was me. So he invited me, you see. We danced, and he said he was happy to speak French, and then then he invited me again, the next dance. And then he said, well, he'd like to meet my parents. So that's how it started, you see. That was my future husband. He was half French. His mother was French. And he had spent the first half of his life in France. So about a year and a half later, I went to England and got married. My parents still were in Austria. And we all had papers to come to America, but we had them for 2 years, I think, and there didn't seem to be any progress. We thought we'd probably never get to America. So I was in England. I really didn't like England at the time at all. I felt very not at home, Austria was different. I don't know, maybe because there were so many Russians, but there was a lot more warmth. There was a feeling of warmth there, but in England I was very alone. We got a letter, well, I got a letter from my aunt from America saying that if me and my husband wanted to come to America, she would send us papers. Well, I thought, oh, my husband loves his England so much, he'll have So I never even said anything. And just maybe 2 or 3 months later, I sort of mentioned it somehow. I said, why didn't you tell me that before? Yes, he wants to go to America. I was so happy, so happy. He wrote a letter to my uncle right away, the next day. And my uncle sent a reply and sent us some papers, necessary papers. So, I think about 3 months later, we already were on our way to America. So we came here in April, and my mother and father finally got their papers too, and they got here in July. So we all lived in my aunt's and uncle's house. That was a beautiful house. between Chelsea and Dexter. It was a wonderful Russian house, full of guests always. It was just like paradise to me. That was one of the happiest time of my life when I lived there. By the way, maybe that would be interesting for you to know that you've heard of General Denikin. I think that here before we got here, he came here with his wife and stayed at my uncle and Aunt's house. They spent, I think they stayed for a month or two, and then he became sick. And they took him to St. Joe's in Ann Arbor, and he died here in Ann Arbor. But the last 2 months of his life he spent here at my uncle and Aunt's house. Well, so we stayed there and in January, I auditioned at the School of Music here at the University of Michigan, was accepted, and eventually very soon I got a master's degree in ballet performance. And then my life started here, you see. I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you.
Dima, will you give Natalia Yurevna the microphone?
Do you want to have questions?
Oh, we could have questions. Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Dale?
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Nice and loud.
What year did you move to America from England?
In 49.
Okay.
There's a question.
Do you know what happened to your aunt who stayed in Russia?
Yeah, she survived.
Which survived?
She, and then she had a daughter who I met. I went to Russia, several times later. And this daughter came here, visited me, and she has also children and grandchildren now. And I have become acquainted, even one of the grandchildren, one of the grandsons came and stayed with me last year.
Go ahead.
Vasilina, have you traveled to Europe after that? Have you visited the places you spent time during the war?
Yes,
Yes?
yes. Well, starting about 1970, we went with my husband back to Europe every year. So always England and France, that was absolutely necessary. But then also some other places, yes.
Oh, John.
I did want to point out one thing.
Yeah.
On the Soviets taking the refugees back
Yeah,
and the suicides,
yeah.
that was reported here, and Eleanor Roosevelt intervened, and the United States put a stop to it. We stopped repatriating people back to the Soviet Union because we were seeing, or our soldiers were seeing, these people were so desperate that they were committing suicide and this sort of thing. They were jumping off of the trucks and all sorts of things, and it was very obvious, and that was reported back. Eleanor Roosevelt intervened and got a decision made that those people did not have to go back, and that stopped it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Natalia? Yes, Natalia.
I'm sorry. When did you start to live here? You said in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, in 49.
49. And since this time until now, you didn't have church or no?
Well, once in a while we would go to Detroit also the Greek church, and there was also a church that was, I don't know, established in 1950s, early 50s. Actually, my mother and her sister started a little church, very, very few people. It was called Saint Hilarion, because my uncle was, his name was in his memory, because he had died in 1952. So actually, there's an icon here, Saint Hilarion, that we dedicated in memory of this church and of my uncle.
So maybe not everyone knows that we're not the first Russian Orthodox Church in Ann Arbor. We are the second. That was the first.
When you were a child, you traveled, or had to move quick to different places and all this horror in your life and every day just misery almost. How was the spiritual life at that time?
Well, that is so difficult. But, well, the spiritual, I think when you suffer, it sort of nourishes you spiritually. Because you have to think really of God. It really, you cannot live without it. So, well, of course in Greece we had a wonderful church, but all the time, even in Vienna, in Austria, we also had a church, a wonderful church. But you spiritually commune all the time. When you suffer, you don't forget.
That was something you were holding on to.
Right?
That was something that you holding on to.
Yeah.
We have, I can tell for many of us that we have struggled in many families to keep it actually spiritually alive, we're new to that, or a lot of us, and it's not easy. It's not easy. Maybe we should live a harsher life.
Be the first who said that.
The Lord will send.
You won't be the first who said that.
Any other questions for Natalia Vasyevna? All right, let's have Natalia Yurievna speak with us.
I wasn't watching the time, so how much time have we spent already?
You get as much time as Natalia Vasyevna had.
No, I can't compete with that.
19 minutes and 43 seconds.
I don't want to keep people waiting. And so let me just say that I won't bore you with the details of my personal life, and I just want to give you a glimpse of what it was like on the other side of the Iron Curtain, because, since I want to give you a kind of a parallel comparing maybe apples to apples. So I will start with saying a few words about my father. He passed away earlier this year, and this will be also a little tribute to him. But I just want you to have kind of a feeling about what it was like to have or not to have faith, and how it happened that there was some kind of a miscommunication between generations. So this is just a preamble. So let me just give you some specific episodes from my father's life. My father was a very talented person. He ended up having 2 degrees in electrical engineering and also in languages. He kept this love for languages through his whole life. But he was growing up, he was born in the 20s, he was growing up in a family where he had no idea about God. So religion was not only prohibited. It wasn't even mentioned, so it was kind of a vacuum there. Now, my father was a very entrepreneurial kid, and I'll give you one little episode, which is when he was about 7 or 8 years old, he got some kind of a projector for his birthday. Projector meaning that you could have like a slides, there were no film at that time, some slides that you could see on the wall. So his entrepreneurship ended up being like that. He put the blinds down, like created this dark room, put one of his mother's sheets on the wall, and invited some of his friends from the street to come over and look at those pictures. And he was telling them stories about, so he was entertaining them, and he wanted each of them to give an equivalent of maybe a nickel to, for the performance. Now, and he performed maybe 2 or 3 of those sessions when his parents learned about this. And he told me about this episode later, when I was a teenager, and he said he still remembered the horror that his parents experienced of learning about that, because I think the projector was destroyed by parents, and they forbade him ever to do anything like that. That crushed his, businessman, efforts for the rest of his life. I'm sure if he was born in the United States, he would have been a successful businessman. But what I'm trying to convey here is that my father, when he was telling me about this, he was in his 50s, and he still remembered the fear, how scared his parents were. So any sign, because if they were condemned as capitalists, they would be sent to Gulag, my father would be sent to orphanage. So it was serious. It wasn't just, for him learning a lesson. It was, survival skill at that time. So I think the same thing applies to any, mismatch between the official dogma and, what people could express. So that's why in my family, my parents, when I grew up, it was also no talk about religion, and it was not because it was forbidden, it was non-existent. And I think, I'm stressing this over and over, I think it's hard for people who grew up in a free country to imagine this condition. So it was just a vacuum. People did not hear or did not see it unless, I don't know what the percentage of the families who still carried those traditions was, but it was very slim, definitely, very slim. So I was in one of those families. So, and just to give you an idea about how it feels like to not know what God is, and if God even existed, I can tell you, on my maternal side, my grandma always baked really tasty goodies for Pascha. And I remember seeing those colorful eggs on Pascha. It didn't even enter my head that it was Pascha. It was just a feast. And my grandma, again, so that you understand, she never mentioned that Christ was born. She was just giving us this. And so she was observing this, and my parents probably knew she was observing this, but it was never mentioned. It was the unmentionable. And I remember I was happy to have those, and I could feel that there was a feast. And now I connected all those dotted, dots, and I have a picture. But that's how it was. And just to give you a couple more real brief examples, when I was in Moscow in high school, starting high school, I had to walk from the house where we lived towards the metro. It was in the Taganka area, and right by the metro there was a church. I can't remember who it was dedicated to. It's a one of those little churches. And as I was walking in the morning, I remember it was winter and really crisp snow crunching under my feet. You know, it was a really beautiful morning, and I could hear the bells ringing in that church. And for whatever reason, it felt like it was something magical. It was very beautiful. It was better than music. And I don't know, I just remember that chilly morning, and I was moving towards the sound. It felt very uplifting. Now, I had no idea what kind of feast that was, and I had no idea why the Bolsheviks allowed ringing the bells. Frankly, I don't know what the laws were. That was it. So it was glimpses of this and that. And I'll give you one more example, and then we'll leave it off. And this was really how I started feeling that I wanted to read and know more about faith. When I was a couple years older, or maybe, so I was already starting college, I used to share an apartment with a friend of mine, a girl who just invited me to share her apartment. And in the bedroom, there was a walk-in closet. And it was kind of a very simple apartment. The walk-in closet was a nice-sized closet, and we kept our clothes there. And I very soon noticed that on the top shelf, there were like shelves, there were really thick books there. And because I was a student of languages, and I was always interested in reading, I asked this young girl, so can I look at those books? And she said, no, these are my grandfather's books, and my mom doesn't allow anyone to touch them. And I said, oh, please, can I just take a look at them? And he said, oh, my mom will be really angry. I said, oh, I will not hurt them. And then she said, you cannot really look at those books because there are the Bible and some religious books from my grandfather, who was a priest. And I became even more intrigued, and I said, well, I want to read them. And she says, well, we have to close the curtains because, if the neighbors see, you reading these books, my parents will be in trouble. And then I said, yes, I'm ready, to close the blinds and everything. And then she said, no, that's not even enough, because if somebody knocks on the door and comes in, you have to be in the closet to read those books. So this is how I first read the Bible. I was sitting in that closet. It had this red light. I was sitting in that closet and reading those thick books, and I was enchanted. I cannot even begin to tell you how I felt, because they were printed before the revolution, and because it was the priest's Bible, it had parallel texts in Church Slavonic and in Russian. The Russian text was in the old script with Yati, it was old. So for me as a student of languages, it was paradise. And I just wanted to share, it's a personal thing, but I think I got lured by the beauty of the words. It's not just, it wasn't a philosophical, attraction. It was just the beauty. I remember I read the first lines of Genesis over and over because it sounded like it was, I don't know, it was music and beyond music. It was just beautiful. And so that's how it was the beginning. I can't say I believed, but I knew it was something special, that just the combination of words meant more than the meaning of those individual words. It had some power that I realized, was more than what we could learn like in a textbook. So this is I can tell you more, but I think it's what? Well, I don't want to hold up people. I just wanted
can leave.
to tell, well, so maybe this last story is contributing to what Natalia Vasilyevna already said, that there are some seemingly random episodes that all come together, and then finally you get this realization that yes, you are getting there. Okay, so if you have questions, I will be happy to tell you more. Yes, Ms. Owens.
Forgive me, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but so that my ears can hear, can you recite the first couple of lines from Genesis in your native tongue? I would like to hear how it sounds like.
Well, frankly, I can't, if you give me the first line, I will continue. But I remember there were some words, «И земля была безвидна и пуста, и Дух Божий носился над водою». All these, they sounded like
Начальник создал небо и землю.
да, and then repeating, и увидел Бог, что это хорошо. And it was, there was this rhythm and breathing in those lines, you know. And so it was really...
It might just be that it's sacred scripture, because I've had the same experience reading an English Bible.
But you know, Natalias, in Hebrew, it is poetry, actually.
Oh, I understand. It is in English.
I think when it's a good translation, Dimitri, a good translation conveys this feeling of poetry, I think. The good translation does this. So Church Slavonic does that.
Church Slavonic does that.
Even good Russian translation gives you the same feeling. Do you want me to read it in Church Slavonic? Yeah. Вначале сотворил Бог небо и землю. Земля же невидима и неустроена, и тьма вверх бездны, и Дух Божий ношашися вверх воды. И рече Бог, да будет свет, и быть свет. И види Бог свет, яко добро, и различи Бог между светом и между тьмою, и нарече Бог свет день, а тьму нарече ночь, и быть вечер, и быть утро, день един. Oh, this is so beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
This is read the first thing on Monday morning of the first day of Great Lent.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. But then I read bits, and then I thought some books were boring, you know. Книга царств, you know. But, so I picked and chose, but the spool was always there.
No, yeah, when you read them in Old Testament that the people are doing bad things, the good question to ask, why are you surprised? That it actually happens with people.
But maybe if I can add the moral to the story, I think the main thing is that no matter how barren the land is around you, so I had no access to information about God, and still some glimpses were accumulating and bearing the fruit. So, yeah.
Other questions for Natalia? Natalia?
Your brother is a priest,
Yes, yes.
and you said your family never. How it was with him? Can you just a little?
Oh, he had a
Because you
different...
said you never believe your family.
No, nobody believed mine. You know, I got baptized, you know, myself. It was my decision in 1980. So it was later than when I started reading the Bible. And my brother was baptized maybe a couple years before me. And he had his own path. You know, he met some people he talked to, and then he became very religious and became baptized and lived with a priest as a послушник. Yeah. But we didn't live. You know, he was in college, I was in college, so we didn't have the same path.
The priest was Dmitry Dudko. He was really
really
very well-known priest of that time. Very well known in the West also. This kind of
And that was your brother?
pre-Glasnost times.
No, Dmitry Dudko
Was
was
the
my
one
brother's
influenced it?
duchovnik, yes, spiritual
Oh, all
father.
right. Oh, that's very. You got to tell us more. I'm terribly intrigued. I very much admire Dukov.
Well, my brother was I could say he was the faithful, because there were times when Father Dmitry was politically ambiguous, and my brother always talked to him just as a supporter. And I thought about, maybe telling you more about my brother, but I think it's not my...
We'll ask
well,
him.
yeah, you'll have to ask him, because my brother went through very difficult times, because he was open. He was out of the closet. I was in the closet reading the Bible, and my brother was out of it. Yeah, he was. But that was later.
So, just as an example, he suffered. I mean, he lost his teeth.
Yeah, he was taken by KGB and beaten up, basically.
So next time when Father Vladimir comes, maybe we'll ask him to tell a little bit more. We've never asked that sort of thing, but happily he comes to visit us, and their mother Natalia Ivanovna still is alive, and or not Natalia, Nina. And so hopefully Father Vladimir will come to visit sometime soon.
Yeah, but let me answer Natasha. My brother was, I can't say he was an atheist, but he was without God till he was maybe 25 or maybe 23, something like that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about it.
He was, yeah.
But you mean not without God, he just didn't...
I mean without
we
consciously
yeah.
embracing, yeah.
Because I can see you and him, if you became so, it's just, you were not without, it wasn't your...
No,
God
I'm
was
not
with
meaning...
them, but they were
Yeah.
not with him.
Yeah.
God was with them.
We did
No,
not
I
know
mean, if they become like that,
we didn't get the message. We didn't have it.
You got him.
Okay, thank you.
So it is possible
Absolutely.
to start from nothing.
Other questions for Natalia?
So when did you move to America?
1990.
And you studied Old Slavonic there in Russia or here?
It was mostly labor of love. I never was in the Russian philology department. I was in German philology. I was reading Old English texts. I wasn't reading Old Russian texts, but because I loved it, I read it. Yeah. And if you want another little anecdote, when my first son was born, both my husband and I, we were reading a lot of religious texts, and so my first son got to read his first book when he started learning to read at about age of 5. It was the Gospel. So that was the first book he read. And we tried to keep our children away from the official indoctrination, so they never went to the Soviet kindergarten or the Soviet daycare. So he was kind of preserved in this bubble at home. And then inevitably he had to go to school. And the very first couple months they started to learn the rules of behavior for the young communist something October kids. Activrata. And I remember it, and it was dangerous. It was still dangerous to show that you were religious, and so we kind of kept quiet about that. And then my son comes home and says, today we practiced, those rules. And I was a little apprehensive. I said, and how was that? And my son says, oh, they're pretty close to the gospel. So they say you have to study hard, to work hard, you have to always tell the truth, you always have to help your friends, to love them, to be respectful towards your teachers and your parents. And I thought, oh, he got it right. So that's where it starts, all the moral, the moral maxims, they start from God. So he got it from there, and so he could accept what good was taught in school. And I think it's a nice illustration of how people living even in a godless society could keep their morals, because those moral the Ten Commandments still work, even if it's subconscious, or for my son it was done the right way. Okay, so that's an anecdote.
Other questions?
Thank you, Natalias. Happy name to you.